Hello, everyone, and welcome to this KE Concordat webinar. We are in webinar mode, so you can see us. I can't see you, but I know there's a good number of people in the room today, which is really lovely to see, and you're all very welcome. So today we are going to be talking about the REF and about the PCE pilot in particular, because over the past few months, anybody who has engaged with the workshops that Vitae has been leading and the development of the PC pilot, I hope you will have seen some common ground with the KE Concordat and its approach to self-evaluation and thinking about a knowledge exchange culture in our research organisations. So I thought with the pilot running, it was a good time to come together and talk about this. And I'm really delighted that Jolana Pringle from Vitae is joining us. We have Paul Manners from the NCCPE, and we have Sarah Preston and Louise Maythorne from Bath Spa University, who are one of the pilot institutions. So they are the experts. I really am in a facilitation role here because I've been involved in PC workshops and things as an attendee rather than anything more to that. But it's I think it's a really important conversation that we have right now. So I'm going to invite Jolana to start. She's going to just give us a little bit of the context to the PC project so far. Then we'll hear from Sarah and Louise about how the pilot's going at Bath, and Paul will add his reflections afterwards. Please do put any questions you have in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll pick those up at the end. So we're here we've certainly got 45 minutes, and we can stay a little longer if we need to. Right, Jolana, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. So I have been asked just to provide some initial reflections on the journey to REF PCE 2029. And I think it's really important to stress at the outset that we have been on a journey and we are still on a journey, and that actually the indicators in the template that are under discussion at the moment and are being piloted in institutions are something of an experiment, and that Research England has been very keen to test out and try lots of different potential approaches. And so I think it's important to recognise that what we're going to end up with, because we are still on that journey, is likely to look quite different. I appreciate for many institutions who are looking at the REF deadlines coming up very, very quickly, with something of a sense of trepidation. But it's also, I think, really quite an exciting opportunity to really test this out, to think about what might be feasible, what might be feasible if in the next REF, if it's perhaps too late for this REF, but to really approach this with openness, and a sense that actually this is a really, really important thing that we're trying to do in the UK. So, as I said, the journey to REF PCE is ongoing, and the start point could be back in 2021. Research culture was something that was also considered in the environment element of REF 2021. It's also appeared in previous iterations of REF as well. So assessing research culture in itself isn't necessarily new, but there is certainly a much more expanded scope and importance that's being placed on research culture at the moment. So June 2023, which now feels like really quite a long time ago, just when the FRAP initial decisions were published, and these went into a wider sector consultation, and there was a specific consultation there in relation to PCE as well. And certainly those consultation submissions, there were about 150 of them from the sector. They really have formed the initial piece of research that we did as part of the PCE Indicators project. The PCE Indicators project itself kicked off in January 2024. At the same time, Research England announced that they were going to run a pilot exercise. During the PCE Indicators project, We ran a series of workshops. We went through a series of iterative phases to develop a long list of indicators, to think about the wording of indicators, to think about the aspects of culture that are important. And there were some key messages that came out of that project that we presented back to Research England, and that they took into account as they were developing the current PCE guidance. The PCE pilot exercise kicked off November, December last year. And as I mentioned, they've really approached this as an experiment. They have made clear that they don't anticipate everything that institutions are being asked to try or potentially collect data on at the moment will make it into the final product. They're really interested in understanding the wider availability and accessibility of that data, but also to consider the different approaches that institutions might need to take to articulating what a good, what a positive research culture environment looks like in their particular institution. Then moving forward to autumn 2025, this is when I think in some ways much of the real work will happen, and certainly in the conversations that we've had with REF PCE pilot panelists, they're already kind of thinking ahead to that period in the autumn where they'll be working with the REF team to co-develop that final criteria and guidance, which will then again go out to further consultation. So we're still on this journey, and as I really would like to stress that what is being considered is not the final version. That will hopefully come in early 2026. I'm just going to outline a couple of insights from the REF PC workshops. The first one being that it was very clear from the beginning that the sector really wants a broad, flexible approach to research culture, that actually any attempt for REF to come up with its own potentially quite narrow definition of research culture might actually be counterproductive. It might limit some of the more innovative approaches to research culture that we're seeing in the sector. Research culture as itself is a rapidly evolving area of practice as well. And that might also discriminate against some of the smaller, more specialist institutions, which have their own, in many cases, really flourishing research cultures that might look quite different to those perhaps in larger Russell Group institutions. One of the things we did in the initial workshops was to explore some of the different purposes for assessing PC in REF. There were a wide range of potential purposes that were put forward, but I think there were two that came through most strongly. The first one being to incentivize institutions. So there was a real sense that this is an opportunity to get research culture onto the very highest levels of the agenda within institutions. And that's actually something that's really quite significant and could be a really significant shift. And then secondly, to reward progress with institutions, but that ideally this should be through some kind of journey-traveled approach. An approach that takes into account the very different starting points within institutions, that can really account for the diversity of the sector and the different approaches that institutions are taking. And there was one kind of message, or there's one message that came through that I often think about is, well, can we use this as an opportunity for institutions to tell us what they've done with what they've got? There were some clear calls for the templates as far as possible to build in those opportunities for reflexivity. There was discussion around whether it's possible, whether it's even feasible to allow institutions to reflect honestly on their journey in relation to research culture. So not just this being an exercise in which institutions are picking the best initiatives, but actually can be more honest about the issues and challenges that they faced within their own institutions. As part of that, there were examples that were provided around different approaches to evaluation within the sector. But often those discussions kept coming back to, well, ultimately, REF is about money and is about allocating money, and how honest can institutions really be, and how can they really how can those approaches to kind of self-evaluation, self-reflection really work in the context of REF, which is ultimately about allocating funding. There were plenty and repeated concerns, very valid concerns about reporting burden and data availability. And much of this was connected with that kind of that broad and flexible approach to research culture. So it's kind of, on the one hand, institutions and people within all different levels within institutions, different role types, having calling for that flexible approach to research culture, kind of on the one hand, but then kind of recognizing that the flip side of that is that institutions may be being asked to do too much. There may be too many options for them to think about. And there were some really key messages that came out through that that we've fed back to Research England about those opportunities to reuse data that's being reported for other purposes as well. And I know that Research England have also been thinking about the extent to which they can support institutions by pre-populating some of that information as well. Another key message that came out is that, and it's really fed into the design of the indicators, was that ideally these indicators should be broad, they should be inclusive, so they shouldn't just focus on particular types of institutions or on particular types of staff as well, and that they should be really worded in a way that encourages the panelists to reward commitment, reward efficacy and the relevance of the things that institutions are trying to do, and not just the money. And as part of this, there was a really strong call to ensure that any quantitative and qualitative data as well is properly contextualized in a narrative. And then finally, another message that there is no such thing as a perfect evaluation. And this is partly why the pilot exercise is happening at the moment. That we are on a journey, and this profile will evolve and will continue to evolve, and will evolve even beyond REF 2029. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. That's great. And I'm hoping that the audience can start to hear some of the common, I suppose, common threads with the Concordat, that concept of assessing an institution in its context of, the resources it has, the place where it is, and the kind of disciplinary profile and so on. And I think this concept of research culture, which for our purposes we're going to assume means research and knowledge exchange culture as well, and how that is facilitated. And of course, that's what the Concordat was trying to explore, how those internal dependencies and relationships, as well as the external connections that we make, do help to incentivize and reward individuals for doing KE activity in that case. So lots of threads beginning to emerge. So we're going to turn to Sarah and Louise, who are going to share the experience to date of Bath Spa University. And I thought, when I contacted Louise to ask her to speak at this webinar, I just thought a small institution, although these exercises can be very burdensome, I think sometimes a smaller institution has the silver lining of being able to see lots of things on one or two desks, rather than things happening perhaps in a more in an unintentional siloed fashion in a bigger institution. So I thought Louise and Sarah would be able to give us a little bit of a snapshot based on their experience in the Concordat and now in the pilot. So I am going to share Sarah's slides. So everyone see those okay? Yeah. Okay. Sarah, do you want to?
Yes, thank you, Tamsin. So just to introduce myself, and then I'll let Louise introduce herself. I'm the head of the research office at Bath Spa University, and this is the pleasure of my third REF. So I've been through a whole range of different experiences over the last 10 years. But Louise, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Louise. I'm the Knowledge Exchange Manager based in the Research Support Office. at Bath Spa, and I think Tamsin hit the nail on the head. When you see these agendas on a few desks, then you can spot the synergies, and that's what Sarah and I have been busy doing.
Can we have the next slide, please, Tamsin? Thank you. So yes, as I said, this is our third REF I've been leading, so I'm leading the PCE pilot for the institution. And as Tamsin said, the advantage of having a small team and a centralised team is that we can all talk to each other. We have a very good grasp of what's happening across the institution. So we've drawn in our impact team, our bids team, our KE team, and we're all working together to pull those things together. We're using it as a sort of developmental process to craft the narrative that we want to tell as we approach the REF2029, and also to address the gaps in evidence, of which there's many. We're borrowing and stealing from as many places as possible, but we know that we've got a lot of gaps, and this has given us an opportunity to really drill into what those are and think about how we're going to put those mechanisms in place. We thought long and hard about whether we wanted to go into the pilot and if we had capacity. It's not my day job. I'm doing 101 other things as well as our UOA leaders, but it's been useful in that we've beginning to get a feel for the story that we want to tell, and also for what we need to get in place to put the evidence, pull that evidence together for the real thing. At the moment, we're ignoring the word counts, and one of the things we want to do is to get feedback from the panels on what is the most relevant. And what we're really focusing on trying to tell in our narratives is how we're embedding what we're doing across the whole institution in the context of our sort of limited resources. So the requirements itself are for an institutional statement, shows what measures have been put in place to support our research culture and the distance travelled since the last REF, and the reflection or learning that's been gathered for future development. We've got a little bit of that in. I'm not sure how many universities will be reflecting honestly on things that might not have necessarily gone so well. We've had to gloss over some survey figures. But what we're trying to do is really evidence the impact of the work that we're doing, mapped across the range of qualitative and quantitative indicators where we've got them, and then highlighting where we haven't got access to that material or can't get access to that material. Partly for resource reasons, partly because we haven't got, big fancy Chris. All of our bids and awards data is on spreadsheets. So it's a challenge, but we're getting there. And then the statements for each unit assessment demonstrate the impact that the institutional measures have put in place within the unit and any discipline-specific measures that have been put in place. And those of you that have been in the REF PCE forums will know that that's been one of the challenges, is what is the link between the UOA statement and the institutional statement. The institutional statement is only worth 5% of the unit statement. So, there's a lot of information in the institutional statement, and what the panels have, what the REF team is saying is that the statements at institutional level will be made available to the panels, but it won't be obligatory for the panels to sort of really read them. So the poor unit assessment leaders are now struggling to put a lot of the institutional concepts into their own statements, as well as fleshing it out with all that discipline. So it's a challenge, and I think a lot of the feedback will be around word limits, how you make sense of what's happening institutional, reflect it in institutional, the overlap between the two. And I think the REF team haven't really got that right yet. So I think this process is going to help think through that process. And also, I think it's still very opaque about how they're actually going to mark these, how they're going to assess them. What's the 4-star research environment look like in a small institution in comparison to the research intensive. So there's still quite a lot of challenges, but we're collating and providing as much evidence as possible by the deadline of 19th. And then there's a feedback process that fits along that. So we get an opportunity to feedback on specific elements within the institutional statement and the discipline level statements, as well as an overarching sort of survey and analysis that will happen as part of this process as a Miro board, or we can, put all of our comments. Suffice it to say that people are fairly grumpy about the process, and it's a lot of hard work. But still, we'll get there. And it has been useful, so I am grateful that we did the pilot, even though I'll be glad when it's the 19th of March and it's submitted. Next slide, please, Tamsin. So as Tamsin showed on her little sort of wheel, there's 5 areas of assessment. strategy. So, you know, what has improved as a result of strategic initiatives? How can you document those? So, you know, what have you been doing? How are you meeting external standards? You know, we've talked about all the concordats, pointed to action plans, all that sort of thing. Responsibility. So, you know, what's been the impact of learning and training? How have you participated in responsible research initiatives? There's a very strange session on carbon emissions and sustainability, which nobody really understands why that's in there. And really, you know, it's about documented changes in research standards and behaviours and changes in practice. So what has the work that you've been doing helped to, and how has it helped to change practice at the sort of unit level and institutional level around EDI, responsible research, open research, all of those things. Connectivity is a section that really overlaps mostly with the KE Concordat, and Louise will talk a little bit more about that in detail. And again, you know, lots of things around contributions to collaborative research, cross-institutional grant applications, co-authored research outputs, things that people will know, certainly in England, that come from KEC and KEF, but also aligned to the KE Concordat. Inclusivity, they're looking at longitudinal data around sort of EDI and, you know, the impact of those activities, initiatives and practice. So how are you using good and equitable processes to inform the work that you're doing? So if you're running seed fund programs, if you're screening for external research grant bidding, you know, how are you making sure that's equitable and fair? How is that embedded in your promotion processes, recruitment processes? You know, all of those sorts of things. So they want to see the statistics, but they actually want to see what are you doing in practice to make sure that everything that you're doing is being done on an equitable basis. One of the challenges we have at unit assessment level is that quite a few of our 4, possibly 5 of our units might be less than 10. So EDI data is a challenge. We were criticised in the last REF for not providing EDI data at unit level, but we didn't provide it because we had less than 10 FTE. So, you know, we were told not to. It was in our institutional statement, but they didn't refer to the institutional statement. So, you know, that's one of the things that we've fed back. So there's a challenge about how we're presenting some of those things at unit level. We've obviously got the data at institutional level. And then there's a whole section around development. So, you know, can you demonstrate the impact of your learning and training data? They don't want to know how many courses you run and how many bombs are on seats. They want to know, actually, can you demonstrate the impact of that? You know, what's changed as a result of the training and development that you've got in place? You know, what are your well-being measures? How are you supporting your staff? How are you giving your staff time to do research? You know, very difficult in these challenges times, particularly difficult for teaching-led institutions like ours. What's the impact of those activities, and, you know, how are you tailoring your approaches to support staff and PGR? So it's a massive, massive task, and, you know, in 6,000 words, and I think most of us are going over that. Anyway, next slide, please, Tamsin. So in terms of the connectivity section, we're going to spend a little bit of time just really looking at the links to KEC and KEF. So the connectivity section is all about how you support your research enabling staff, so technicians, research support teams, research development officers, anybody that's enabling research to happen in the institution, as well as research students. So how are you helping them to share their research KE and expertise internally, externally, and what are you doing in terms of open research to support them? We don't have an open access grant, so, you know, we have to be quite careful at how we advocate for open research because we can't fund all of the requests for open research. So, you know, it's a particular challenge for us, but we're supporting it in different ways. And then they're looking at, you know, how you're promoting sustaining high quality collaborative research and promoting mobility across careers, sectors, you know, all of those things. And those will all be familiar from KEF and KEC. So some of the quantitative metrics we've actually drawn from HEBKI. So the number of cross-disciplinary grant applications, spread of co-authored, co-produced research activities, collaborative research details. I've taken those from the HEBKI table, and we've been able to show a trajectory of growth over the REF period. We were lucky that we got some build back HIFE money because we hadn't got HIFE, and we used that to invest in initiatives like a short course unit, which has then sort of like created a pipeline for business and industry engagement, that we can show that we've grown sort of in those areas by drawing on our HEBKey data. So there's different ways you can use that data to support what's going into the REF. And I think if you're an institution where you've got very, very separate KE offices and research offices, this is a really great opportunity for, you know, the KE team to get some of the REF glory by saying, look, we can help you with all of these metrics, and we can give you all of this data that's going to show that we're doing really well in these areas. So I think really capitalize on that opportunity. Next slide, please, Tamsin. Yeah, as I say, we're developing the institutional note essentially with input from HR, the data team, library, anybody that we think can help us. Our research office includes staff responsible for KE impact, pre-post award, research development. Sorry, obligatory typo in one of my slides. So we can draw on all of that knowledge, which has helped. And we're piloting within 3 unit assessments. Each of the UA leads are developing the narratives in very different ways. So it'd be useful to get feedback about the different approaches. We've got fortnightly peer support workshops in place. We've come together every 2 weeks to sort of moan and groan and share, you know, good practice and sort of pick each other's brains on where we're getting data from. I'm collating a bank of data essentially that they can draw on for some of the initiatives that we've put in place. So, for example, we've just done a big analysis of all of our seed funding projects that we've supported through QR. We've tracked how many early stage researchers have been supported. So we've given that percentage, and we've also then mapped which of those projects have led on to external grants and awards, and we've been able to show that there's been an uplift in success rates for those, and actually that a lot of things that we supported at seed fund level have then led to external funding. So that's a sort of a nice narrative that we've been able to show. Anyway, I'll stop there, but I'm going to pass over to Louise, who's going to talk more about the interlink between REF and KEC.
Thank you, Sarah. Afternoon, everybody. Tamsin, can we have the next slide, please? Yes, thank you. I would just like to draw your attention really more fully to the connectivity section and the way in which the PCE pilot and the 8 principles of the Concordat overlap, both in terms of their overarching ambitions, but also at a more granular level in terms of the evidence and the enablers that they're looking for you to demonstrate. And I know that quite a few people on the call today have joined from REF teams, so they may not necessarily be familiar with the 8 principles of the Concordat. So I will just run through them quickly, and maybe some bells will start to ring. So the first of them is mission. So you're looking to make sure that KE is a recognised part of your overall institutional strategy. The second principle is policies and processes, making sure you have a well-defined set of relevant policies that supports knowledge exchange. The third principle is engagement. So you're looking to build clear routes to access information and expertise within the university. The fourth principle is transparency and ethics. So we're looking to make sure that our partners understand our approach to inclusivity and equality. The fifth is capacity building, so really training of staff and students in the institution. The sixth principle relates to recognition and reward. So we're making sure that knowledge exchange is recognised and celebrated where it's of excellent quality. The seventh principle is continuous improvement. So we're looking to proactively share best practice with our peer set. And then the final principle is evaluating success. So what are the regular institutional and collective monitoring exercises to make sure that we're on track? And I'm sure that as I'm saying those principles, you're already seeing the connections between the connectivity principles. So philosophically, both exercises are all about sharing knowledge and expertise widely, and how you're collaborating and you're co-creating with folk outside of higher education. But also in terms of the specific enablers that the exercises are looking for, there are a lot of parallels. So Tamsin, if you can share the next slide. Thank you. So as a sort of broad set of principles, both exercises are looking for evidence of strategies that have got measurable results. And you'll find evidence in things like your promotion criteria, your workload planning, the seed funding that you have to offer internally, your approach to inclusive and fair practice, and also, as Sarah's alluded to, some of the KEC data that you'll be reporting annually, things like the number of co-authored outputs or the amount of collaborative research income that you're generating. So if you could kindly click along. I thought it would be worth just zooming right in to some of the ways in which your Concordat submissions map onto some of the qualitative measures that Research England are looking for in the PCE pilot. So when they're looking for documented evidence that you're celebrating and recognising these activities in promotions criteria, you can see that maybe some of the policies and processes evidence from the Concordat, the second principle, would map very neatly onto that. You can repurpose that evidence. In terms of making sure that your infrastructure is working effectively, then you could look at the 8th principle of the Concordat, the enablers for evaluating success. When you're thinking about the kind of support that you offer for events, maybe refer to the mission, the 1st principle of the Concordat. When we're thinking about evidencing and facilitating those exchanges, maybe you would draw on the 1st principle, mission, or the 2nd principle to do with your policies and your processes. In terms of mechanisms that you have in place to reimburse your partners, you'll have evidence for that under transparency and ethics in the Concordat. In terms of the evidence and of the quality and the significance of your research collaborations, maybe evaluating success in the Concordat would be a useful resource to start teasing out some of the themes. How are we going to evidence that our infrastructure works effectively? Well, there's the policies and processes that we've spoken about in the Concordat. There's the continuous improvement that we've spoken about in the Concordat as well. And it won't only be the Concordat from which you can draw, but there will be things like the public and community engagement, the self-assessment exercise that you complete for the KEF will be a rich source of resource in terms of the evidence base. Also some of the KEC data that you'll be collecting, some of the narrative statements that will underpin your KEF submission, maybe some of your HIFE accountability statements. So your KE resources will be, supporting these agendas and these conversations as you start to build your own PCE evidence base. Tamsin, could you click along, please? Yeah, so just a few kind of considerations really in terms of future development. We've spoken today about the BASPAR perspective on connectivity and the overlap between connectivity, but there are also synergies with the inclusivity section and the development section. So it's not only confined to this connectivity section. And I think it's worth really reflecting on whether this alignment between the Concordat and the PCE pilot, which appears to have been accidental, needs to be more intentionally aligned so that we're not duplicating effort and we're not overburdening, already stretched teams who are pulling this together. Or perhaps actually what Research England want to do is to reposition the PCE questions and to inflect them slightly differently so they are wholly distinctive. I don't personally think that's the answer, but I think it needs to be intentional either way. And I know that Paul can lead us to some more macro perspectives on what the evolution of research and knowledge exchange culture might look like in response to these synergies. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much, Louise and Sarah. That was a really useful explanation of your journey, and thank you for those reflections on the Concordat, Louise, and how we might make use of those synergies, if not for this exercise, certainly in the future, and as we continue to think about research and knowledge exchange culture. So Paul is going to offer some reflections from his perspective at NCCPE. Paul, obviously very involved in the development year for the Concordat as well. So without further ado, I will hand over to Paul. And you're going to share your screen, aren't you, Paul?
I was going to try to, Tamsin, but if I can't, I might ask you to help. I'm not sure whether you can see it. I think probably you can't, but would you mind sharing the slides, Tamsin, and then I'll
just, them. Yeah, you start. I'll just go and find them.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think we have been on a journey with many people in this room as the KE Concordat kind of came into life. And equally, we've been on a journey with the REF over the last few years. And what I wanted to just share in this presentation were just a few thoughts about what's changing, actually, and particularly the opportunities that the PCE element of the REF creates for those of us who work in exchange and engagement, because the two worlds seem to be coming much closer together. So that's what I wanted to start with, really, was just a reminder. Once we see the screen, just a reminder of our approach. At the NCCPE, we care about engagement. We care about knowledge being shared widely, whether that's through knowledge exchange, whether that's through the REF, whether that's through the civic activity of universities. But we just want to make knowledge work as hard as possible for people. And the next slide, I think, just reminds us also that we're living through the most amazing times of change, and some of that's very traumatic, but I also think some of it is very energizing. And if anybody's seen this film, I think it captures a period of transition as well in society. And I think we're living through change, and it's changing how we need to work in the sector. So the next slide is just sort of trying to land this. Even back in 2022, even before things got really sticky, UKRI was identifying in its strategy that change is essential for us collectively in order to respond with agility to the social, environmental, technological, and economic change that's going on around us. And Tamsin, if we could have the next slide. They talked about diversity, they talked about engagement, about connectivity, about resilience. You'll recognize these words. They're dotted around in both the Concordat and the REF. And they also talked about this need for a really connected, agile, but heterogeneous system, not a narrow system, not a system with one business or operating model, but a diversity. And so it's so lovely to see Sarah and Louise here talking about the really distinctive ways Bath Spa creates wonderful value through the ways it builds its knowledge and shares its knowledge. So the next slide puts the two next to each other. The Concordat on the left, obviously, the REF on the right. And I mean, if you're interested in language, isn't it interesting that the REF used to talk about outputs? And now you look at the bottom, it talks about contribution to knowledge and understanding. And I think that in itself is a massively significant shift. It's really trying to say that the REF is about opening up the knowledge we produce and create. And importantly, the people, culture, and environment, I think, is where there's really strong connections across to the Concordat. So with the next slide, I think a way we are trying to make sense of what's going on here is this isn't just about jumping through hoops that the funders throw through their policies. It's actually thinking about what journey are we traveling as a sector in terms of how we understand our role and our ways of making knowledge work. And I think this idea of different modes of knowledge is a really helpful way of thinking about that. With mode one, the traditional academic work, which is still vitally important, but I think is increasingly being balanced with an investment in mode 2 knowledge, which is more applied, and mode 3 knowledge, which is much more about building knowledge in and with the world. And if we go to the next few slides, we'll just step through them. When we started in 2008, it was the RAE. Do you remember that? Anybody old enough to remember the RAE, which was all about mode 1? Along came REF2014, and sitting alongside it, I think, an acknowledgement that impact and exchange and engagement matter. And HIFE and the REF sat together. With REF21, I think we saw things like the KEF developing in England, KEF and RWIF, and the civic agendas in Wales and Scotland as well. I think really bringing the worlds of engagement, impact, knowledge together. And then REF2029 and the KE Concordat, I think, are definitely nudging us, inviting us into a world where mode 3 knowledge is as valued as mode 1 and mode 2 knowledge. And I think that's really interesting for us collectively. And it's where the expertise of many people in this room, perhaps who sat in KE boxes or public engagement boxes, can lift the lid and come out and sort of frolic in the fields of the REF. So the next slide, I've nearly finished, is massively simplistic, even more simplistic than perhaps I usually am, but it's almost like a penny farthing bicycle. But back in the olden days, we had research, this great big thing, KE stuck on the edge, and public engagement, you know, a little pimple on the edge of KE almost, if you wanted to be modest about how it was viewed in 15 years ago. Now, looking to the next slide, I think we've got a much more balanced picture. We've got a world where research on the one side, engagement, impact, knowledge exchange on the other, are kind of equally valued, and people, culture, and environment sit right at the heart. And that, for us, has always been our focus, which is how do we create the conditions for this kind of way of working to be sort of truly embedded. And the phrase or the sentence at the bottom is exactly how the REF describes what it's trying to achieve through the people, culture, and environment, an inclusive, collaborative research system supporting a diversity of ideas, institutions, methods, outputs, and activities. And that's a world I'm very happy to be part of. So just coming right to the end, just a quick reminder, it was lovely hearing Sarah and Louise talk about how you could take the criteria in the people, culture, and environment, the enablers rather, but you can equally take the criteria for people, culture, and environment. Those of you in REF roles will recognize vitality, rigor, sustainability. You can read across equally well to the principles in the Concordat. And as Sarah and Louise have demonstrated, you can bring all of that learning from the worlds of the Concordat and knowledge exchange into your REF submission. So where are we now? Final slide. Yes, this is a call to arms, really, I think, for those of us who care about engagement and impact and knowledge exchange. You know, what are we after? For me, it is this resilient, inclusive knowledge sector working in agile and responsive ways, and a motivated, diverse, and highly skilled workforce who are excellently led and managed. And you know, I think working together to make the best of the REF is going to help us achieve that vision. And I would love to see this happening now. I don't want to wait any longer. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Lovely to end on such a positive note there as well.
That was you, Tamsin, in the image, by the way. Leading from the front.
No, it's great. And I know when Paul and I were talking about this webinar, Paul used the word mindset. And I think it's about creating, you know, that kind of engagement mindset. That's what we want to achieve, isn't it? And whether that means engaging in the, you know, from the point of view of specific discipline and how they understand that engagement, or how an institution might understand its engagement, and all linking to its mission, and you know, the civic engagement, which we haven't really we've kind of mentioned but not drawn upon, is such an important part of a university's mission these days as well. So probably lots that we could talk about. We've got about 10 minutes. I can see we've got a few questions, but I don't know whether Jolana, obviously you've been leading at VTI the evolution of the PC pilot and indicators projects. Well, you've been involved in that evolution. I mean, do you have any reflections on what's been presented by Louise and Sarah, or commented by Paul, in terms of how next steps and what you're hoping to be able to achieve?
Yeah, so firstly, I should clarify that the PC indicators project is quite separate from the pilot exercise.
Sorry, yes.
So we came up with a long list of indicators and a draft template in collaboration with the sector, and we had workshops, sector workshops. We also had workshops with the pilot panelists and the REF steering group. Research England then reshaped that into the pilot guidance, and the pilot exercise they're managing, and they will evaluate that at the end. Yeah, I was just kind of reflecting as I think all the other speakers have been doing on that overlap in terms of thinking about the principles or obligations in the Concordat and the guidance as it stands at the moment. And it was interesting because yesterday I was talking about the Research and Development Concordat and its links with REF PCE guidance, and I was saying the same thing. So actually, look, you can map all of these, and it's interesting because actually both of these concordats are very kind of culture focused. They require a culture shift, a different way of thinking, and recognize that to see real change or progress in a lot of these areas, you need to cast the net quite broadly. You need to be thinking about recruitment, policies and processes, how you're developing and supporting your staff, and so that really cuts across all of the different aspects. In terms of thinking about the place of the concordats, I mean, so we, in all of the workshops, I think various different concordats were mentioned, and there was real kind of split opinion, I think, as to their role within this exercise. There were some people that just thought that just said, well, look, we're already doing all of this reporting, you know, why should we be re-reporting, even if it is just copying and pasting from statements or reusing data that's already been collected and submitted for other things? Why don't we just keep them completely separate? And then others saying, well, we're already doing it, so we could just bring it in, and that might actually reduce some of that burden. And then at the same time, I think that recognition that that not all institutions are able to be signatories to all of the different concordats and initiatives that are out there, and that actually by keeping the profile quite broad and flexible, there are those opportunities for institutions to tell their own story.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm enjoying some spring sunshine here in Cambridge, and I'm just like squinting slightly at my screen. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because of course the Concordat, the KE Concordat, had its development year, which actually was probably about 2 or 3 years at the end. We mentioned there was a mention of honesty and self-evaluation, which was a really important part of the Concordat. So the self-evaluation exercises weren't shared and weren't scored as such. There was the peer review panel was the way that feedback was given. So I think one of the challenges for the REF in incorporating something like the KE Concordat is that challenge of kind of assessing it on a sector-wide basis, using something other than peer review and doing it on a scale that the REF exercise requires is a real challenge, and something that you couldn't necessarily adopt from the KE Concordat. And I've seen we've had one question, about how how you might prepare for the next Concordat, and of course our KE Concordat at the moment isn't a required assessment from any funder. Research England don't fund the KE Concordat. It is very much a voluntary exercise, and so there's that question of how we encourage institutions to respect it as a form of self-evaluation and self-assessment for knowledge exchange, possibly using it in the context of something like the PCE indicators and at an institutional level is a way of doing that if it has a utility. But this is this is a slightly different conversation for the Concordat, is how it does maintain momentum beyond that development year and beyond that specific funder link. I think it's still a really valuable part of our assurance framework, but it's just kind of rooting it in something and making it feel like it can make a contribution still, I think, is challenging. I don't know if anybody else wanted to come back with any further thoughts on the links. I'm just looking at questions. So this is a question that I think Louise and Sarah and I touched on when we were discussing this this webinar. I'm not in a REF specific role, but wonder if there's a steer on what will be required for the impact and engagement part of REF, and how much overlap there might be there with the PCE element. I mean, this word engagement and impact is something we referred to, wasn't it? And of course, impact in 2014, we thought of very much, that we kind of thought that was our KE element, and now, it's the concepts of collaboration and engagement are in straddling two elements of the Concordat. So, sorry, the REF. Sarah, do you want to?
Yeah, in fact, I just typed an answer into the Q&A, and it's an interesting question. So there will be a narrative element of the impact case studies, and the importance of that and the value of that will depend on how big your unit of assessment is. So if you're less than 10 FTE and you only got one impact case study, the narrative for the impact section could actually be worth 50% of the score for impact engagement. So I think if you're a small unit, there's lots of challenges, but it also gives you the opportunity to really talk about how you're embedding your impact and engagement strategies within your discipline, and really, that could add value to your section. So there'll be overlap, but we talk about impact and engagement in the institutional statement and in the UOA narratives. So it'll be a case of thinking about different ways of approaching that across the whole submission.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting with REF2029 is that section used to be called impact, and it's now called engagement and impact. So again, it's an acknowledgement of the exchange being part of the process, and it's also been proposed that within it there's an additional criterion of rigor, which is to acknowledge again the fact that the skilled work that goes into anticipating, preparing for, evaluating and scaffolding impact is really significant as well. So I think the work that all of us do in that knowledge exchange space again is being invited in to the REF in a way that it still found its way in. When you read case studies in 2021, people talked a lot about the methodologies and the practices that underpin the impact, and assessors found that really helpful. But now it's actually being invited and recognised that it matters. So a big shift.
Yeah. And I think it is a real opportunity, as you say, if you're in a larger institution and you don't normally have those day-to-day links between a research office and a KE office, or have organisational structures are so different across the piece. This is an opportunity to go and understand a little bit more about the REF if you're in a KE office and don't have day-to-day responsibilities for that, and vice versa too. And I think one of the strongest values arising from the KE Concordat was this internal relationships piece that we explored, and thinking about internal key dependencies, so that your knowledge exchange processes and systems were that much easier, because if functions like HR, finance, whatever, the research office understood what you were trying to achieve through knowledge exchange, then when you came asking for something that looked slightly unusual, because KE collaboration agreements and so on do tend to look a little bit more unusual, it would be perceived as less of an unusual thing to tackle there and then. Louise.
Thank you. Yes, I was just reflecting on what Yolana said about the grumble that is sometimes heard. Why do I have to copy and paste it twice? Why bother filling the same information into both exercises? And actually, I think it's so important to make precisely those connections that you're talking about, and to really reinforce that a rich research culture underpins a rich KE culture, and vice versa, and the interconnectedness and the interdependency between those, I think, is well evidenced when we're asked to sort of cross-refer in those various exercises. And I think that's an asset, not a weakness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might make this that was a lovely kind of comment to end on, I think, Louise. And actually, we might just reinforce that we're all pushing in the same direction here. We're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is to make research we have this definition of knowledge exchange, that it's a creative and collaborative endeavour, but of course that applies completely to research as well. It's not a KE specific definition necessarily. We want to create an environment where researchers can pursue cutting edge ideas in collaboration with all sorts of communities, whether that's something that's very civic based, or whether it's something that's international, or wherever that occurs. And the challenges of assessing that activity, are well aired, and we're well practiced at it. So hopefully we can bring some of that practice into the REF and help Research England across the board in how it evaluates PCE indicators and elsewhere. Right, I will bring us to a close there. Thank you very much to Yolana, Paul, Sarah and Louise for joining us and sharing thoughts. The slides, the presentation has been recorded. We'll make it available on the website, and do get in touch with me. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn and through the Knowledge Exchange UK website if you have any further questions about the Concordat specifically, and if you have any questions about the PCE. Do visit the REF2029 website, because there are so many ways that you can get involved and find out more there about the project. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoon.